Well, today is a very exciting day for Into the Wardrobe, and that's because today is the 50th episode of this channel. And throughout the years, as we produced episode after episode, you have asked some amazing questions along the way. Many of those I've answered in the comments, but I've never gotten a chance to actually address some of my favorite questions here in an episode. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dive into some of my favorite questions that have been asked throughout the years. Now, since the last episode was released, a lot has happened, some exciting things that I want to make sure that you don't miss. The first is that we got a news announcement from Netflix Narnia. You see, a casting call was issued by the studio in England asking for a 10 to 11-year-old boy and a 10 to 11-year-old girl. Now, why is this important? Well, it confirms that we are not going to be rebooting The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That really means the only two options for what this movie will be are The Magician's Nephew or The Silver Chair. And as I've been saying, my money really is on The Magician's Nephew. It has been all along, and I think all signs continue to point to that. So that's exciting. Now, another cool thing that happened this week is that I got a great piece of fan mail. In the last episode, I took you through some of my favorite books to read after reading Narnia, and I showed you my copy of the Space Trilogy, which was actually incomplete because I gave away my full copy recently. I had a fan send in his own personal box set that he has had since he was a teenager. So thank you to Christian out there for taking the time. It's an honor to receive such a wonderful gift. And I promise you that I'm going to put together this incomplete set and I'm going to send it out to one of you very soon. Now, speaking of giving away books, have you heard about this channel's Golden Bookshelf giveaway? Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but first, what is a Golden Bookshelf? Well, it's an old idea that involves setting aside a set of books that you continue to come back to and to read throughout your life. And each time you read them, these books continue to grow you and to shape you. Now, this contest was started by our friends at Boyce College because they care about not only helping people become lifelong readers, but also lifelong learners. Now, they have put together an amazing website specifically for us, the Into the Wardrobe viewers. And if you follow the link in the description below, you will have access to an amazing set of resources, a series of videos that teach you how to become a better reader, how to think about the books that you read, how to remember the things that you read, and how to grow from them. I really encourage you to go check out this page. And while you're there, you can register to win the Golden Bookshelf Starter Set. This set includes 4 titles by C.S. Lewis: Mere Christianity, Surprised by Joy, Till We Have Faces, and a preface to Paradise Lost. But it also includes some other books that we think are important, like The Mayflower Papers and Paradise Lost by John Milton. Not only that, but you'll also get some great swag: a Boyce College sweatshirt, a Boyce College pennant, and this amazing C.S. Lewis mug. So please do yourself a favor. This registration ends on March 31st, so as soon as this video is over, go to the page and register. And finally, thank you to the Patreon members that make this episode possible every week. You've been with me for 50 episodes, and I'm so thankful for the community that we put together. Well, there's some great questions to be answered today, and I can't wait to get into them, so let's get started. It's time to leave the Shadowlands behind and step into a world that's more real than our own. It's time to follow me into the wardrobe. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, this first question comes from one of the first videos that I ever made. It's actually The Life of Jadis, Part 2, and it's written by viewer Matt McCaff1. And Matt says this: 2 things. Firstly, love the channel. It's so good. Thank you, Matt. And secondly, how do you come up with the dates like she returned after 900 years? Are there some books that I've missed? Well, Matt, that's a great question, and it actually shows me that you've read the books carefully and you've read them thoroughly, because you're right. There are many dates that I talk about on this channel that aren't actually in the books themselves. So where do I get this information? Well, one thing you should know is that I'm very careful to only include canonical information in these videos, or if there's some sort of conjecture or presumption that I'm making, I'm trying to be very careful and let you know that that's what I'm doing. I say this because there are some fan sites out there, some wikis that include information that are not in the books. They may just be made up to fill in the gaps of the lore, or they pull the information from movies, even worse. So I want you to know that I am very careful about this. There is one other source of information that most of us consider canon that's actually not found in the books, and that is what I call the official timeline of Narnia. And this is a timeline that was written by C.S. Lewis for Walter Hooper, his personal secretary, and Hooper later published it in his book, Past Watchful Dragons. Lewis wrote this for Hooper when Hooper asked him some questions about the timeline because he was a little bit confused. So Jack sat down for Mr. Hooper and wrote out a timeline with very specific dates and events, some events that had not been written about in the Narnian books before. Now, this is a very useful resource. For example, we know from the timeline that the Pevensies entered Narnia in the year 1000 NT. And we also know that Jadis's enchanted winter had lasted for 100 years. Well, that's a great question, and it's one I've been asked many times before, so I'm glad to finally clear that up. Let's move on. This next question was posted on the episode The Stone Table Explained, and it's by viewer Kim Author, who asks, is the splitting of the table in half not the same as when the curtain was torn in the temple after Christ died? Well, Kim, great question, and yes, absolutely, you were on the right track. When Aslan was resurrected and the stone table split in half, it was absolutely reminiscent of the curtain tearing into on the veil in the temple. But what's really fascinating about this question is that it just goes to show you how many layers of meaning C.S. Lewis was able to embed in so many of his events and objects in the Narniad. And in this video, I talk about a lot of different references and meanings that came together to form the picture of the stone table. But there is one reference that I am still to this day embarrassed that I did not include in the video. At the time, I thought it was so obvious that it didn't need to be mentioned, but now I see that so many of you have asked, what about this? And that is that the stone table is also reminiscent of the cross of Christ. Of course, as Aslan was crucified on the stone table on top of a large hill, also Christ was crucified on the cross on top of a large hill. Now, there's so much more that could be said here, but I should say that since then I've learned my lesson. I've tried to be much more clear and much more explicit in some of my videos. But thank you so much for asking and for giving me a chance to address that. Now let's look at the next question. This question comes from the episode entitled, Did Jadis Really Die? And it's written by user TigerFire75, who writes, why didn't Aslan kill her before he did? She was evil, as he clearly knew. Why then and not before, or at very least remove her from Narnia back to Charn? He knew where that was. Well, that's a really interesting question. A couple of things to address here. First of all, we have to remember that Charn actually was gone by this point. We remember in The Magician's Nephew, when the children and Jadis left Charn, Jadis was actually the last living creature in that world. And as they exited, they saw the pool dry up, indicating that Aslan had actually called down and closed up Charn. So sending her back to Charn, that wasn't an option. Now, why didn't he actually just step in and kill Jadis when she invaded Narnia in the first place? Well, I talk about this in another episode, but the truth is Jadis was actually needed in Narnia to serve as the Emperor's executioner. We learn from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that the deep magic calls for justice to be served. And actually, if it is not served, Narnia itself would actually cease to exist. Now, thankfully, the deep magic only called for this type of justice until the Golden Age prophecy was fulfilled, when Aslan died in the place of a traitor. After that, she was fair game, and it didn't take Aslan long for him to take her out. So good question. Thanks for asking. Let's look at the next one. Okay, this question comes from the episode entitled The Life and the Death of Lucy Pevensey. And this was one of my earlier episodes where I hadn't yet done a face reveal, so everything's all voiceover. This comes from the JWCam77, who writes, I don't see any credit for the narration. Is that John C. Reilly? Well, you know, actually, it's not the first time that someone has said that my voice sounds like John C. Reilly's, but I got to tell you, I just don't hear it. I guess all I can say is I hope that I sound more like Wreck-It Ralph than someone like Dr. Steve Brule. But thanks for asking. Okay, next question, and this one also comes from the same episode. And in this one, our user, whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce, asked the question, I just realized that after an entire lifetime of reading this book, that the timing is all wrong. The four siblings hide in the wardrobe for just a minute, but they age 10 years in Narnia. So why didn't decades go by when Lucy visited Mr. Tumnus the next day? Okay, I see where you're coming from with this question, but it's actually based on a misconception. A lot of people assume that there's some sort of fixed ratio between time in our world and Narnian time. Because the Pevensey children spend so much time in Narnia, and then when they return, it's as if only a few minutes have gone by. But the truth is, there is no fixed ratio. You can see that in the timeline if you try to do the math on the amount of time that passes between entering and leaving Narnia between books. But C.S. Lewis described the relationship as thick time and thin time, hardly something that was mathematically precise. In fact, there are some people who believe that it's even possible that this relationship isn't even linear. That is, there may have been people that entered Narnia before Narnia was ever created, according to the timeline of our world. Does that make sense? I'm not sure, but thanks for asking. Let's look at the next question. This question comes from a very old video called The Life of Tash. And in this, the user Loch Ness 5524 writes, "Is that really a depiction of Tash, or did you just use art of the Skeksis from the Dark Crystal?" Yes, I just used art of the Skeksis from the Dark Crystal. This video was created at a time when it was really hard to get a hold of artwork, especially artwork about Tash. And so most of the art that I created during this time was a combination of Photoshop collages, digital painting, and then some slight manipulation. And honestly, I wish that I could go back and remake this. Maybe one day I will, but for now, that'll have to do. Nowadays, we have more useful tools. I can create some generative elements with AI. I can blend them together better. But for now, I think this will have to do for this video. One day, maybe I'll recreate it. Let's move on. Now, this question was posted in the episode about the Lady of the Green Kirtle entitled, "Who is the Lady of the Green Kirtle?" from the Silver Chair. And in this one, the user Lai Lang asked the question, "Why did the witch need the prince? She had control of the underworld and was poised to conquer Narnia. It seems that Rillian was unnecessary." I do understand what you're saying, but you have to keep in mind that there are several strategic reasons that the Lady of the Green Kirtle kidnapped and kept the prince for so long. For starters, the fact that Rillian was missing for so many years actually served as a distraction to King Caspian. He spent most of his time looking for his son and less of the time that he should have ruling his kingdom. It also took a very deep psychological toll on Caspian. We know that he fell into deep depression, and possibly some other mental illnesses occurred as a result. Undoubtedly, Caspian aged prematurely, and a lot of this grief and stress is what led to his early death, which incidentally may have been a key strategy of the Lady of the Green Kirtle. We see at the end of the Silver Chair that she timed her attack very closely to another very important event, and that was Caspian's death. It's very plausible to assume that the strategy was to wait until Caspian's death and then launch a surprise attack on the Narnian army, who was now leaderless. And then once she conquered the throne, in order to give herself more validity, she would bring forth Prince Rillian, who would in turn turn his throne over to her as he was under her magical enchantment. So great question, a lot of fun to think about, and personally, I love it when viewers ask questions that really stress test the narrative of Narnia. Almost always, it seems like Narnia still holds up. Let's take a look at one more question today. And this one comes from a more recent video entitled, "Who Made Narnia's Wardrobe?" And it was written by viewer Larry K130. Larry asked this: "What does he mean when he starts each video with a world more real than our own? How is Narnia more real? I love these books as a kid, and I'm lucky to have channels like this to discuss and learn." Well, actually, that line comes from The Last Battle, and it isn't used to describe Narnia. It's actually used to describe Aslan's country. And it's Aslan's country that is the real country, more real than we could ever expect. And our world and Narnia, well, those are just shadows of the great realities of Aslan's country. And I believe that what makes those realities so great fundamentally is that they are rooted in truth and beauty. And so when I say it's time to step into a world that's more real than our own, I'm not talking about Narnia. That's an invitation. It's an invitation to join me as we explore a higher realm, a place that's founded in truth and surrounded by beauty. And that's the place where we will truly find Aslan himself. I've enjoyed exploring that realm with you for the last 50 episodes, and I hope you join me as we explore for many more episodes to come. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time as we take another journey into the wardrobe.